Spiritual food for thought.
Welcome back, and thank you for joining me once again. Today I'm going to deal with a specific response from an individual. I have a screenshot of it on my phone just in case it got edited later, and if it does, that's fine. That's good probably. But I'm not going to put up on the screen because I'm not trying to attack or shame an individual, but I want to present some common things that people say that really don't make any sense. And if we thought about them, we wouldn't be saying them. I actually have two series I plan on coming out with. One is bad Bible verses, and they're just bad Bible verses to quote to prove certain points because that's not what these things say. People rip them out of context. They don't even make sense if you put a little thought into them, but people treat them as if they're valid. They repeat them often, therefore they go with them. And the other one is just things people shouldn't say. And there are these cliches which sound good, which have maybe a biblical premise, but if we actually applied what they said, they don't even apply what they said. There's actually a lot of hypocrisy in some of this stuff. And as we sort through the faith and try to learn what the truth is, the more often we're able to look at what verses actually say, or kind of scrap what we've been just taught and trained to believe, which is extra biblical, and see what Scripture actually says, then we can get a better understanding. But when people keep throwing out stuff into our path that just doesn't even hold up to a simple biblical test, or just an even, reading it with serious, scrutiny of what are these words, what do they mean, all of a sudden you wind up, that doesn't mean that at all. So there are these stumbling blocks that as we try to find that pure faith and the application thereof and what the Scripture really says, and if that sounds strange to people, there wouldn't be all these different denominations and belief systems and things if it was very simple and easy. We'd just all be on the same page of the same book, chapter and verse, but that's not the place in which we find ourselves these days. The saddest part about that is this particular individual has at least seen a lot of the things that I'm going to bring to the table, but a lot of times it's a knee-jerk reaction or response that is triggered by just saying something that they don't even really read. And I'm going to share a little bit of what they actually said in the screenshot I have on my phone. We're going to look a little bit at what the Scripture says, and I only say a little bit what the Scripture says because I'm actually going to glean quite a bit from this book I wrote, which is not a plug from the book, but all of this has been shared already, and this person's commented on some of this in some posts I've made online, and a lot of it is Scripture. All the bold stuff is Scripture. So there's a lot of Scripture here, which is why I draw my conclusions from it. So the first thing that they said was, this speaks of a pre-tribulational rapture. I was sharing some reasons I no longer believe in a pre-tribulational rapture, and they said this speaks of the pre-trib rapture. And they quote Matthew 24, 36 to 44. Now, when I went to an evangelical free church, the pastor told me Matthew 24 and 25 said not the church, future Israel. He told us to write that in our Bibles. And a lot of times pre-tribulationalists will do two things. Number one is they will say the Olivet Discourse, Matthew 24, 25, and then parallel passages like Luke 21 and Mark 13 have nothing to do with the pre-tribulational rapture. This is after the church is gone. They will say that repeatedly, but then they'll also quote verses from it and act as if that applies to the pre-tribulational rapture at the same time. You can't have both be true. So the part that they quote comes from verses 36 to 44. Starts off with, no one knows that day or hour, right? But the interesting thing is if we just back up to the beginning of Matthew 24, he says, all these things are going to happen. Nation will rise against nation. These are the beginnings of sorrows. They'll deliver you up to be afflicted and shall kill you. And you shall be hated of all nations for my name's sake. Many shall be offended and betray one another. False prophets will arise. Says the gospel of the kingdom shall be preached as a witness unto all nations. Then shall the end come. Shall say, when you see the abomination of desolation. So this coming that we get to in verse 36 that nobody knows the day or the hour of takes place after the abomination of desolation. This is chronological here. It says, after that there shall be great tribulation. It says, there shall many false prophets be arose, And after the tribulation of those days, the sun shall be darkened, the moon shall not give her light. Okay, this is verse 29. Those things will happen before. Okay, and then in 30, we read, then shall appear the sign of the Son of Man, and all the tribes of the earth shall mourn and see him. And 31, he shall send his angels with the sound of a great trumpet, and they shall gather together his elect from the four winds. Now learn the parable of the fig tree. When the branch is yet tender, and putteth forth leaves, you know that summer is nigh. So likewise, when you shall see all these things, you know that it's near. It says, heaven and earth shall not pass away, heaven and earth shall pass away, my words will not. Of that day and hour knoweth no man. There's a whole bunch of things that are going to happen that let you know it's near. It's near. You still don't know the specific day or the hour, but you have things that happen ahead of time which show you that it's near. Like I said, you can't have it both ways. Either Matthew 24 and 25 speak of this rapture, or they do not. But you can't say it has nothing to do with the rapture and then quote from it to provide some evidence of a pre-tribulational rapture. The next part gets really interesting because it says, we also know that Jesus will return at the end of the Great Tribulation. It will be 7 years after the Antichrist signs a 7-year peace treaty with Israel. You'll be able to mark on your calendars when Jesus will return. The part that I find to be really sad and flawed about this is that if this is true, if we can mark on our calendars to a day, the day he'll actually return, then why wouldn't Jesus say so in Matthew 24 when he's giving this revelation to his followers? I do know that it says there is a man who will sign a 7-year treaty. Daniel speaks of this. I know that in the midst of that 7-year treaty, there will be the abomination of desolation, but it's that abomination of desolation that Jesus speaks to twice, both in Matthew 24 and in Mark 13. He says, when you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet, let him who reads understand, then flee. If it was this signing of the covenant that would make him revealed, why wouldn't he give people a 3.5-year head start? Seriously, if your life is going to be on the line and I need to give you a warning, and I can give you that warning 3.5 years ahead of time, I would be a fool not to do it. I cover that subject on day 12 in this book, and I'm going to skip ahead, but I talk about from 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, verse 4, it says, who opposeth and exalteth himself above all that is called God or that is worshipped, so that he as God sitteth in the temple of God, showing himself that he is God. Now this is the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet. This is what Jesus points to in Matthew 24, verses 15 and 16, and Mark 13, verse 14. I go on to say here, in both of these passages, just as in 2 Thessalonians, the event pointed to is the abomination of desolation. Once the testimony of Jesus is considered, a logical question arises. If the confirming of the covenant, as this person claimed, is what reveals the identity of the Antichrist, why does Jesus not give his audience a 3.5-year head start? Their successfulness in fleeing would be exponentially increased if they started 3.5 years earlier. Why then does Jesus point to the abomination of desolation and not the confirming of the covenant? The point I make is that perhaps most of the world will be unaware of this covenant. He only says that it happens, that it's going to happen, not that we're going to know about it. And therefore, we'll have to wait for the abomination. As this revealing of the Antichrist's identity relates to pretribulationalism, the error in their view is further exposed. Since he must be revealed prior to the rapture and the beginning of the day of Christ, these two events cannot occur until at least sometime within the second half of the 70th week of Daniel. To not have Jesus return until after the Antichrist arrives and persecutes believers is not what they would prefer, but our preference does not negate biblical truth. In Matthew 10:22, we're told, and you shall be hated of all men for my name's sake, but he that endureth until the end shall be saved. This is certainly not what Christians throughout history have preferred, but it is the biblical reality. Many will look at the Great Tribulation, spoken of in Matthew chapter 24, verse 21, and affliction, Mark 13:19, which begins after the abomination of desolation, and desire to have no part in it. When we are told that the antichrist will make war with the saints and overcome them, in Revelation chapter 13, verse 7, no one in their right mind desires to be overcome with a war with the antichrist. Yet our feelings and desires cannot reveal or cannot change what God reveals. So the point I was making here is that the antichrist is revealed when he commits the abomination of desolation. Daniel speaks of this. It's spoken of in 2 Thessalonians chapter 2. Jesus speaks of this twice. Mark 13, Matthew 24. This is what is pointed to. Not as this guy claims that you can mark it on your calendar based on the 7-year treaty being signed. And point number 2, this means that we may still be on the earth for this event and experience the persecution that follows. This guy goes on to say, Jesus will also appear in the clouds of heaven when everyone will see him, but he first comes as a thief, and no one will know when he comes and leaves. This also is a commonly used verse. I'll go more into depth with it later in a different video. But the point is that coming as a thief in the night does not and cannot mean an imminent return, as pretribulationalists often claim. I cover this in day 16 and 17 of this book, but the verses I use, 1 Thessalonians chapter 5, verse 4. But ye, brethren, are not in darkness, that day should overtake you as a thief. 1 Thessalonians 5:2, for you yourselves know perfectly that the day of the Lord cometh as a thief in the night. Okay, so this, in context, is speaking of the day of the Lord coming as a thief in the night. And honestly, I believe the key to unlocking eschatology is to scrap the tribulation, which is a man-made term, which man created and then man defines, and using the day of the Lord, which is something that God uses in Scripture. He doesn't use the tribulation in Scripture. He uses the day of the Lord, and he gives us characteristics of it, and he tells us things about it. One thing is revealed here is that this day of the Lord cometh as a thief in the night. 2 Peter chapter 3, verse 10, first part of verse 10, says, but the day of the Lord will come as a thief in the night. The interesting thing about that is, if we think for a minute about Matthew 24, verse 43, it says, but know this, that if the good man of the house had known in what watch the thief would come, he would have watched and not suffered his house to be broken up. A number of things are revealed to us about the day of the Lord. First comes from Joel, chapter 2, verse 31. The sun shall be turned into darkness and the moon into blood before the great and terrible day of the Lord come. So although the day of the Lord comes as a thief, the sun will be turned into darkness and the moon will be turned into blood before that. So therefore, if you have something that must occur before the day of the Lord, and if the day of the Lord comes as a thief in the night, coming as a thief in the night cannot mean that it is imminent, as people claim it is when speaking of the return of Jesus. Malachi 4:5 says, behold, I will send you Elijah the prophet before the coming of the great and dreadful day of the Lord. This same day of the Lord that we're told by two witnesses in 2 Peter and 1 Thessalonians, it comes as a thief in the night, comes as a thief. Yeah, in the night, it says both times, will also be preceded, a prerequisite of something that must happen before that, is that Elijah will come. And the sun will be turned into darkness and the moon into blood. Then in 2 Thessalonians, it says, let no man deceive you by any means, for that day shall not come, except there come a falling away first, and that man of sin be revealed, the son of perdition. Now this is talking about the day of Christ. Since I believe that Christ is Lord, I believe the day of Christ and the day of the Lord are one and the same, and I believe that the day of the Lord starts when he returns. I have my reasons for that. But it says here, two things must happen. The man of sin be revealed, and a falling away. So I believe that there's four things. And even if you throw out this verse from 2 Thessalonians, there's still guaranteed two things that must happen before the day of the Lord can start. Yet we're told by two witnesses that the day of the Lord is coming as a thief in the night. An interesting thing is that if this man of sin being revealed is what occurs in Matthew 24, verse 15, the abomination of desolation, well, that occurs before the sun gets turned into darkness and the moon into blood. So we do see him coming afterwards, Matthew 24 verse 30 or 31, the timeline really fits once we look at what Scripture actually says rather than what pre-tribulationists claim. The points I make on this day, day 16, and then I'm going to go to 17 here, are point number 1, the day of the Lord will not overtake us as a thief. Point number 2, technically, this period of God's end-time wrath, the day of the Lord, will not overtake believers at all since they're not appointed to wrath, his wrath. Point number 3, the good men of the house may be able to know in what watch the thief would come. If we're to know when the thief is coming and not allow our house to be broken up, and if this day of the Lord comes as a thief in the night, these are things we can think about. Point number 4, the day of the Lord is preceded by specific events. And point number 5, coming as a thief does not necessitate no warning or signal events coming prior, because there are events that must precede the day of the Lord. So when I head to day 17, it says in Revelation chapter 3, first part of verse 3, if therefore thou shalt not watch, I will come on thee as a thief, and thou shalt not know what hour I will be upon thee. So he may come as a thief if we're not watching. That's what it says there. Revelation 16:15 says, behold, I come as a thief. Blessed is he that watcheth and keepeth his garments, lest he walk naked and they see his shame. So we are told repeatedly that Jesus comes as a thief. The points I make at the end of this, the day of the Lord comes as a thief, Jesus comes as a thief. This could be additional evidence that these events are one and the same, that his return starts the day of the Lord. The day of the Lord is definitely preceded by specific events. Therefore, Jesus coming as a thief cannot be evidence that his return is imminent. And therefore, if we're going to call this coming and gathering the rapture, then it may be preceded by certain events. We know that from Scripture. Then the last point that he makes is one that I've heard before, and it's basically that if we are looking for his any moment return, if we believe in the pre-tribulational rapture, it is great encouragement to live a holy, righteous, continually godly life so that he doesn't catch us unaware. It says here, it's important to believe in the pre-tribulational rapture because it means that Jesus could be coming for us at any time. We need to be living lives worthy of him, and if we're not, so we're not embarrassed at his coming. That sounds good, but there's something else we've got to consider. That thing that we should consider is that our death is imminent. Whether or not he comes at any moment does not negate the fact that we could die at any moment. Therefore, if we're all already convinced that we could meet him face to face and stand before him in judgment, our life is over at that point. There's nothing else we can do, bad or good, evil or righteous. At that point, it's over. So if I am 100% convinced I could die at any moment and meet him face to face, does him potentially showing up give me any added incentive? Well, no, because it's already 100% true that I could meet him at any moment. If I have a concern about being shot at any moment, and then I realize I could also be stabbed at any moment, am I all the more concerned? Well, it's still true that I could die at any moment. The fact it could happen by another means doesn't increase that reality. For me, I think it's absurd and illogical to claim that just because we do not believe he could return at any moment, we don't have incentive for godly living. We know that we're mortal. We know we could die at any moment. And that can't be increased, I believe, if we're already 100% convinced of that, just because he could return at any moment. It doesn't go up to 200%. 100% true is all the more true it could be. Anything else that's added into there can't change that, and it can't add to it. So this is a little bit different of a video for me. I don't always grab somebody's comment and pick through it, but there's a lot of problems with it, and it's problems that I see consistently made from the pre-tribulational viewpoint. A lot of people, their pastors all go through this very narrow gauntlet. They all go to these theological seminaries. They're all taught these very specific things. They come out, they just reproduce after their own kind, make a bunch of people who hear the stuff from the person in authority who spent the time in the classroom, read the books, passed the test, got the paperwork, paid the money. Now they are put in this place of authority, and they say, oh, well, these things are true. They may sound it, but you can't have Matthew 24 having nothing to do with the rapture and then quote from Matthew 24 as evidence for it. You can't talk about the need to believe in his imminent return as some great incentive for holy living. That doesn't make any sense. That's not true. You can't talk about this 7-year covenant, the signing of that, being evidence of the revealing of who the man of sin, the son of perdition, is going to be. That's not what Scripture tells us. Daniel, Jesus, Paul, all point to the abomination of desolation as that event that reveals him. The verse prior to the one I quoted, 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, verse 3, even says, "Let no man deceive you by any means, for that day shall not come, except there come a falling away first, and that man of sin be revealed, the son of perdition." And then it gives us how he's revealed, and it points to him opposing and exalting himself above all that is called God or is worshipped, so that he as God sitteth in the temple of God, showing himself that he is God. It says here revealed. We can't point to the signing of the covenant as how he's revealed. That doesn't hold up to Scripture. And we can't claim that Jesus coming as a thief means that he could come at any time. That's not what that phrase means, and we can prove that by multiple witnesses from Scripture. In the end, guys, I'm not telling you you need to read this book and hear my thoughts on it. I'm not. I'm telling you you need to read this book and see what God actually says. Spend your time, if you got a study Bible, spend your time above the commentary, just in his written word. Yes, I spent some years pouring through this, reading volumes from pre-tribulational scholars, and seriously testing it by Scripture. I found it to be not only errant, and just being errant, just being wrong is enough to be dangerous. But there are some implications as to why I believe the belief in the pre-tribulational rapture is also dangerous. And that's why I put this together. That's why I put it out there, just to give people a real easy way to just kind of consider some things. Just like this channel, it's just food for thought. But I think it's things we need to be thinking about so much more as that day approaches. Hopefully you guys found this edifying. If so, feel free to give it a like. Feel free to share it with somebody who may need it. Feel free to check this out if you want. Feel free to leave a comment. Until next time, be careful and prayerful, and be blessed.
Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe.